Hey, welcome back to Cain Course World History. You have probably just been completely and totally blown away and impressed by that amazing technical display to open this video. And you're probably thinking to yourself, man, my AP World History teacher, he's the coolest, he's pretty great. And I'll admit, a DBQ essay is nowhere near as exciting as the graphics make it seem. In fact, it's pretty daunting in the realm of the AP test. However, I'm hoping that today I can give you some tips and some pointers of how to tackle a DBQ using some real examples as well. And there's a lot of steps that go into this, so I'm going to try to break it down step by step. Now, I'm definitely not going to write the whole thing for you. That's your job. But I am hopefully going to give you the tools that will make you successful. In our last video, we talked about the LEQ, specifically the comparison LEQ, a traditional long essay in the style of a 5-paragraph essay. And the DBQ is honestly pretty much the same. The only difference is now you have documents. And that might be daunting, the fact that you have to read documents and write an essay in a significant amount of time. Yes, that might be difficult, but it's actually easier because they are giving you the information that you need to write on. It's not all coming from you. Now, just like the LEQ, the DBQ has a clear AP rubric, except instead of 6 points, now it is out of 7. The points are as follows. Just like in the LEQ, the DBQ offers up to 1 point for a historically clear and defensible thesis. We'll review that again. It also gives you up to 1 point for contextualization, how well you set up the background and the bigger events in world history, connecting that story to the specifics of your essay. The evidence section, however, is where things change. Instead of 2 points, you can get up to 3 points because, again, the evidence is going to be a little bit different coming from the documents instead of just your brain. First, you can get 1 point if you use up to 3 documents that are given to you in the 7-document packet to support your thesis, to use historical examples. Then, if you go a step further and you use 6 of the 7 documents, you would get up to a 2nd point. Again, you got to get 3 to get the 6 to get the total 2nd point. That later in the video how to extract evidence and what exactly we're looking for, but that's the first part of the evidence. A 3rd point is possible if you use up to 2 examples of outside evidence. That means evidence that isn't in the documents, from your prior knowledge, from class, from a textbook. That's where you pull that in, and you need 2 of those examples to get that 3rd point. That's the biggest difference between the LEQ and the DBQ. There is an additional point in the analysis and reasoning section that has to do with the documents. You need to, for 3 of the documents, explain how the author's purpose, their perspective, point of view, etc., how any of that translates into the actual argument. Basically taking your analysis of the document a step further and explaining why that document is truly a relevant source. And then, of course, there's the classic complexity point, the is your essay good? And we'll talk about how you can get that in certain types of DBQs later on. Hopefully that gives you a good indication of what the rubric looks like. Let's dive into an actual AP test question, a DBQ that was used in 2002. The first thing we should do before we even think about writing is to figure out what is the question actually asking us? What is the prompt so that we can answer that prompt? Well, here's the prompt from the official 2002 DBQ. Using the documents, compare and contrast the attitudes of Christianity and Islam towards merchants and trade from the religion's origins until about 1500. So first we want to understand, what is the question asking us? Well, it's asking us clearly about Christianity and Islam and their beliefs about trade. And what skill is the prompt asking us to use? It's very clearly compare and contrast, showing both similarity and difference between the beliefs of Christianity and Islam. Not between the 2 religions, but between their beliefs in regard to trade. The last thing we want to figure out is there a specific time frame it's asking us? Usually AP keeps us in a time frame. In this case, it's basically Unit 1, right? From the beginning of these religions all the way up to 1500. That fits in about Unit 1. So with that in mind, we can begin to write our essay. But before that, remember, this is a DBQ. There are documents we have to go over. We need to go through those sources and see what do they say historically that fits as evidence before we formulate what our main idea and our main argument is going to be. So let's dive into these documents quick. I don't have time to read every single document, so I'm going to summarize each one and take out what the main point is. Generally, when you read, you're not going to have a ton of time, so you need to skim and try to bring out the main points from that document. In document 1, we have a section from the New Testament book of Matthew in the Bible in which Jesus essentially says that it is difficult for the rich to enter heaven. Again, you can look at that closer on your own, but that's the main point. Jesus explaining how hard it is for a rich person to get into heaven. Document 2 is from the religious book for the Muslims, the Quran, and shows the Islamic perspective, where it says something pretty similar, that Islam upholds honesty and fairness in business, that the merchants who do so are held as blessed in the eyes of Allah, and it talks about the importance of truth between two contracting parties. Document 3, we see the story of Reginald, a monk who early on was not a monk, he was actually a merchant. He had all sorts of worldly gain and success, but he found that there wasn't purpose in this life of riches, and he ends up selling all of his goods to follow Christ more closely, to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Document 4 comes from the old church father Thomas Aquinas in his classic medieval work Summa Theologica, where he expands on many of the other biblical beliefs about what Christianity holds about merchants, saying that it is sinful for someone to sell something for a price higher than what it is worth. A Christian should sell it for the real price, not one that is made up. A Christian merchant shouldn't rip off customers. Document 5 returns to the Muslim perspective from the historian and scholar Ibn Khaldun, who tells about how Islam should recognize that merchants are often dishonest, and yet sometimes this is necessary in order to make a profit. And in order to make a profit, you are doing what is good in the eyes of Allah. So in this sense, it's almost opening the door to some dishonesty, despite the fact that that is clearly wrong. In document 6, we see the Christian perspective once again, explaining that anything that is made in business, any merchant success, is truly a gift from God. It's because it is the will of God, and God blesses merchants who are faithful through success in business. And finally, document 7 tells about the traditions of the Islamic world, and that many of the old laws and rituals prevented. Document 7 talks about the Islamic traditions and rituals when it comes to trade, and that so many of these things promoted, again, equality and fairness in trade. Yet, this document in particular tells the story of an individual who goes against that tradition and buys grain and hoards the cotton for himself, creating a little bit of a conflict in a Muslim world. Once you have the information pulled from the sources about what the sources are actually saying, and you're beginning to answer the question, you can now put together an essay. But before you start writing, there should be an element of pre-writing. Obviously, you should take your notes on each source itself, identifying what the main point is, and then some of the aspects of HIPPO: historical context, intended audience, point of view, and purpose. It's going to be an important part later on in the essay. First, we have to truly formulate our argument. In order to do that, we should group our documents into two clear sides, ones that are similar so that we can begin to craft that argument. Here I have included all of the documents, and again, that little summary of what they talk about. And it seems to me there are certain ones that stand out together. Specifically, documents 2, 4, 6, and 7 all deal with some form of fairness of exchange, really being honest in exchange and business dealings for both sides, Christianity and Islam. Then documents 1, 3, and 5 seem to talk more about the place of wealth in religion, especially from the Christian perspective. So if I group those sets of documents separately, I now have two body paragraphs. And that's going to be the theme of my essay, comparing the fairness in exchange as well as the place of wealth in religion. Because so far it's clear that both of these religions clearly believe that there should be an element of fairness in exchange. Yet overall, Islam seems to glorify trade and exchange a little bit more than Christianity. In Christianity, there seems to be an element of warning against people who begin to make a lot of money, who accumulate a lot of wealth. And therein lies my argument overall. That will become a part of my thesis statement. Before my thesis should come my contextualization, again, setting the background for the overall essay. We talked about this a lot in our first video on the LEQ, and the same rings true. How are you connecting the topic of the actual essay to the greater events in world history? Here I need to start to think about what are some events that I can use to support this argument that can set the broader contrast. And they should probably be things that connect both Christianity and Islam. And there's a number of things, especially since we're talking about trade. I could certainly talk about the Crusades, the collision between Christianity and Islam that really opened the door of Europe to Asia to find a number of different goods and technologies and ideas that really changed Europe forever in the Renaissance. I could also talk about something like trans-Saharan trade routes or Indian Ocean trade routes, or even the Silk Road as well. Three different trade routes that have shaped the way the world has become more connected. So a contextualization that includes both of the background on trade and the collision of Christianity and Islam might look something like this. From their origins to 1500, both Christianity and Islam maintained a clear dedication and societal focus on trade. Civilizations of both religions interacted in global exchange, with Islam in particular dominating trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean trade routes. Such exchange eventually led to the Crusades in the 1100s as the two religions violently collided over the important city of Jerusalem. This collision emphasizes the similarities and differences between Christianity and Islam, both in their religious beliefs and in their thoughts on trade. There I've clearly set the context, talking about both trade and the differences in these two religions. Obviously, I will expand on both of those things in my thesis and my argument. The next key is to create a thesis that is both historically defensible and something that I can logically argue. And again, I've already divided my documents into two clear groups. One group that talks about the fairness of exchange and another that talks about the place of business and wealth within a religion. Now again, the skill that's being asked of me is to compare and contrast. I got to figure out what I'm comparing and what I'm contrasting. It seems to me that the overall similarity between these two religions is, again, this belief that there should be fairness and equality in trade. The difference seems to be how one seems to elevate, Islam in particular, the value of trade and wealth compared to Christianity, which says that that can detract from religious beliefs. So a thesis that shows both that comparison and that contrast is necessary. It will set up my argument and prove that I'm doing both parts of the skill. That's important for the complexity point. So here's a thesis that would show that. While Christianity and Islam maintain similar beliefs about the value and necessity of exchange and fairness in trade, Islam maintains trade as an important aspect of society, while Christianity warns against prioritizing wealth and gain over one's faith. Here I've set up a clear progression, going from comparison to contrast. I've used that counterpoint formula that we talked about in the last video. I've also identified my evidence and where my argument will take me. Now it's up to me to set up that argument and include the evidence from the documents to support my points. With the contextualization, thesis, and documents in hand, we can now write the meat of our essay, the argument, and that's where the evidence from the documents will come into play. Now I suggest, again, you follow this group setting. You have two groups that have clear themes, and from there you need to write topic sentences that set up your pieces of argument. They should relate to the sources and to the thesis. So again, I would have two groups. My first group would talk about fairness of exchange. My second group would talk about the role of trade and exchange in both Christianity and Islam. So here would be my topic sentence, my opening argument for my comparison, this idea of trade and exchange being fair in both religions. Both Christianity and Islam cling to a system of values that encourage merchants to promote fair and equal exchange. Now my goal is to take what I just made in that topic sentence and use the documents to support that. Now again, there's 2 points possible for the evidence from the documents. 1 point if I use 3 documents and just explain what they say. A second point if I use 6 of those documents to support my overall argument. So I have to explain what's in the document and then connect it to my argument. I can't just say what's in the document and assume that that connects. Nor can I just say that the document connects without explaining what it actually says. So I'll do one example for each document group. For my first topic sentence, where I'm discussing the value of fairness and exchange in both religions, document 4 definitely rings true. I can say something like this. In document 4, the theologian Thomas Aquinas explains that it is dishonest to sell a product at a price higher than what it is worth, stating that one should treat one another as he would like to be treated. This supports the overall value of fairness and equality in Christianity, especially in regards to business. See, there I've explained what Aquinas actually said, and I did it without just paraphrasing or rewriting and quoting what he actually said. I put it in my own words and made it shorter and clear. And then I took that evidence, the fact that he believes that there should be honesty in trade, that you shouldn't charge somebody more than something is worth, that you should treat somebody as you should be treated. That's a very clear point, and I've now connected that to my overall thesis, connecting it to my topic sentence, showing that it shows equality and exchange in the Christian sense. Now I want to do that for the rest of the documents in group 1. And I know it says you only need to use 6 of the 7. I would use all 7 just in case. That way you have something to fall back on in case you mess one of them up. A topic sentence for group 2 might read something like this. On the other hand, while Islam clearly supports trade and wealth, Christianity warns that wealth leads to sin. This is my contrast paragraph. Here I'm going to show that Islam elevates the value of trade, whereas Christianity warns against it because of potential sin. Now, there weren't as many documents to potentially support this claim for Islam. That's where the outside evidence will come in a second. But for Christianity, there were a number of sources. In particular, I could use document 1, which comes from the words from Christ himself. Document 1 shows the dissuasion of wealth in Christianity, as Jesus explained how it was difficult for the rich to enter heaven. This displays how Christianity often warns that greed and wealth can distract a Christian from their faith and priorities. There again, I have paraphrased, I have described what the source actually says, taking the meat of the evidence out of the source and now then connecting it to my topic sentence and to my thesis. Again, I would want to do that for the rest of the documents that fit in that category, using them to work together to prove the point of my thesis and my topic sentence. Assuming I do that for 6 sources, I should be good to go. Again, if I use all 7, I'm definitely going to be set. That last point, though, for evidence comes to outside evidence. Now it's asking you to go beyond the documents, to take one fact from world history that you're familiar with from your studies or from your textbook or wherever and support your essay. Again, you can't just say what the fact is. You need to explain how it supports your thesis. So I'll give you 2 pieces of evidence, one for each document group. For group 1, where I'm talking about the promotion of trade, especially when it comes to fairness and equality, I could talk about how both of these religions certainly use trade to their advantage. And both of them have aspects that promote that. For example, in Europe, the use of the Hanseatic League creates a clear league that supports trade and makes it fair. In Islam, we also saw this in the Trans-Saharan Network, especially when they brought camels over and created a clear network in Africa. Using that evidence might look something like this. A piece of outside evidence that supports this is the growth of trading leagues like the Hanseatic League in Europe and the intensification of Muslim trade in the Sahara. Both of these instances show that the respective religions clearly utilize trade to their benefit. That again shows that both of them are using it, and there is an element of fairness to it and equality as they try to make it accessible for everyone. And in section 2, I could use outside evidence to support my claim that Islam elevates trade and uses it a little bit more, promotes it more than Christianity does, who often dissuades against it. Again, there wasn't a ton in the sources that necessarily promoted this, but there's definitely outside evidence, like Muhammad himself, who was a merchant. Because of that, merchants ever since then were often glorified and honored. A piece of outside evidence that supports the role of trade in the Muslim world is the religious founder Muhammad, who was a merchant at one point in his life. Because of this, merchants held a high role in Muslim society and were honored as a result. There I've used 2 pieces of evidence, explaining what they are clearly, not just referring to them, and then using it again to support my thesis. So now I've pulled evidence from all of the documents, and while that certainly supports my argument, there's still one more step if I want to get all those points. In the analysis section, again, I need to use the documents a little bit deeper. I need to explain how the author's purpose, the intended audience, the historical context, or the point of view supports the argument as well. You only need to pick one of those ways to do it and just do it for 3 different sources. It's up to you which one you pick. I think usually using the purpose is probably the best way to do it, or the author's point of view. Those seem to be the most effective. I'll give you one example again, this one coming from document 3. Again, you would need to do this for 3 documents, not just one, but here's one example. I can use document 3 to support how Christianity dissuades gaining wealth. I could say something like this. Document 3 is relevant to the argument dissuading wealth, as its purpose is to tell the story of St. Godric, a former merchant who became a monk. The story indicates how Godric turned away from his possessions to follow Christ and seems to encourage other Christians to do the same. Here I identify specifically what the purpose of the document is. The fact that we are telling the story of Godric and encouraging other Christians to give up their possessions as well. I've also directly connected that to my argument about how Christianity dissuades wealth. Assuming you followed all of those steps, you should certainly be at least in the realm of a 6 or a 7 on the DBQ rubric, which I would say is pretty darn good. I know the DBQ is daunting, but it's really not as hard as it sounds because they're giving you the information. You just got to know where to look and how to put it all together. Time management is important as well. Being able to effectively read the documents, pull out the important information, and then write your essay is a tall task, which is why the best thing you can do is practice. We will write several DBQs throughout the year. This is just the first exercise of many, and I hope to have other videos in the future continuing to give you tips and tools and tricks to write the best DBQ you possibly can. It comes down to how much you practice and how confident you feel in the end. We'll look at other DBQs, we'll look at other LEQs, and even the SAQs and stimulus choices throughout the rest of this school year. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.